assisting with the delivery of this conference at Cranfield University. I'll just be adding Michael to join us here as a speaker. So Michael, you should be able to share your screen. I believe you have the permissions enabled on this platform. Apologies for background noise. I have a window open here, so there's some workers delivering some products outside. Apologies. Hello, Michael.
Hello. Good morning, everybody.
So in this session, Michael is our chair and will be running the workshop as a discussion panel. So for those of you who would like to join the discussion, please indicate on the chat and we can bring you onto the stage to put across your point using the microphone camera function of the Remo platform. So do make sure that you have those facilities available. Alternatively, we can post messages in the chat and the Q&A, and I can pass those on your behalf.
Okay, so shall I kick off then, Sam? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we've got a schedule to follow, so I believe we should crack on.
Okay, so I'm going to go through some very basic introductory material, and then the bulk of the session now will be hopefully a discussion. And as Sam says, hopefully he is well positioned to manage how that works with the technology. But we'll see. So what we're going to do this morning and into lunchtime, I guess, is we're going to be discussing this area of establishing the conditions for large-scale coordinated national TES activity. So just to give that a little bit of context, I'm part of a thing, I chair a thing called the TES Council in the UK. The TES Council is a group of industry players, academics, as well as people from different parts of UK government and funding bodies, organisations like that. So it's meant to be a combined, a joint group that is there to influence policy, so that TES as a subject area gets supported and can develop and grow and become an important business model in the UK. And things like the Cranfield MSc around TES, and things like the development of the PAS 280 framework are things that have originated from the TES Council historically. So there's a little bit of UK focus on this in some ways, but the idea of a large-scale coordinated national activity could apply wherever in the world that was appropriate. But we are trying specifically to explore: is there value? Is there a way in which a coordinated approach that is larger than the boundaries of a single company, or even the supply chain of a single company, can unite together to try and move the whole area of TES forward. So, I mean, just to give you some personal background, most of you, I don't think will know who I am. So I'll just give you a little bit of a short précis of where I come from and who I am. So, I mean, I'm a manufacturing guy. So my early career was in fairly low-cost commodity manufacture. I moved into a career I moved into some jobs and some research activity that was around process technology for the railway industry. I then got into what you might think of as more advanced manufacturing technology around process simulation for aerospace, gas turbines. Developed some more technology management activity around gas turbines. Got heavily involved in new product introduction for aerospace engines, civil and defence, and then broadened my activity that was around technology introduction into different sectors that were part of Rolls-Royce, who I worked for a number of years, including the submarines business, the marine business that existed there, and then trying to manage that on a global basis. More recently, I joined Strathclyde University through a thing called the Advanced Forming Research Centre, and that began my interest in the subject area of TES. The Advanced Forming Research Centre is focused on specific manufacturing technologies, but they are manufacturing technologies that produce critical components that have got declared lives on them. In many cases, things like aerospace discs and other componentry like that. But also, the centre was involved quite heavily and is involved quite heavily in repair technology and remanufacturing and things like that at a metallic level. I've recently taken on a new role in Strathclyde as Chief Technology Officer of the Advanced Nuclear Research Centre. And the ANRC, as we call it, is heavily embedded in asset management and life extension for nuclear plants, both in the UK and globally. So again, the TES model has got significant relevance to that. And I have a university role in Strathclyde as Director of Industrial Strategy as well. So that just gives you a little bit of background on me, just because most of you won't know who I am. What I'm going to try and go through this morning in the workshop is some very basic background on TES and the TES Council. And then the meat of what we're going to discuss is around this second bullet point and the sub bullets that sit underneath it, around establishing the conditions for large-scale coordinated activity on through life engineering services. So a very, very quick recap, and none of you know this. None of you need to know this, because you're all here because you are experts and interested parties in the subject of through life engineering services. But just a little bit of a recap, and it covers some of what John was talking about at the start as well. What is TES? So there's a set of tools and techniques and business thinking, critically, and network behavior that is enabling reliable, predictable improvement of value in use, and enables reliable, predictable reduction of cost in use, specifically for long life engineered assets. So this is about so the whole topic, as we've heard and as you all know, of TES is about this combination of engineering tools and techniques with business thinking and with behaviour of how companies operate and how networks operate, to enable this ultimate idea of reduced costs in use and reduced, I guess, environmental impact in use, as we've heard from the last speaker. There's a strong value proposition around TES, and again, linking to what John was talking about when he opened the conference, but a strong business proposition that is around two aspects, really: increasing the availability, so making high value important assets more available on an ongoing basis, that increases the function and the utility to the user. So as consumers ultimately of products and services, we want things to be available, we want trains to be running, we want aircraft to be running when we want them. So that increased availability is a benefit to the consumer ultimately, and we want to reduce the burden on managing and maintaining and spending money on long life engineering assets, which is an important consideration for those people who own and manage and service those kinds of assets. The TES Council, as I said, is a kind of is a group in the UK that covers industry, academia, and some branches of government, that has a declared vision that is about TES becoming an important business model for delivery of long life assets, maintaining high value through their operational life, and parochially from a UK perspective, for UK to be strong in this area. The mission that we have as a TES Council is about making sure that we've got the right ecosystem in place so that we can do that, and that relates to everything, including skills, technology, supply chain, the regulatory and commercial frameworks, etc. So, the TES Council is a body that tries to tries to steer the ship effectively, tries to establish a level of coordination of what TES is about. So that's just by way of background information on this entity called the TES Council. And the TES Council, as you can see from our mission and our vision, we have a natural interest in establishing the conditions for a large-scale coordinated national TES activity. And yeah, there's from my point of view, as somebody in the UK, this has got a UK focus. But as I said at the start, the question is equally pertinent of anywhere where we're trying to explore whether multiple organisations working together are needed in order to establish TES as the kind of entity that it can be. So for the rest of this session, I'm going to go through a few areas of that we might want to consider. I'm going to try and break up what is, quite a difficult challenge, I guess. I'm going to break that up into a few areas, which are the ones that we see on the screen here, the potential mechanisms that we might exist, the problems that we're trying to overcome in doing this, the role of research, specific gaps in the research that we might see as a group, the question of how we raise ambition in this area, the question of how we get stakeholders more interested than they already are, and fundamentally how we make this happen. So the next phase of this is going to be hopefully about discussion. And getting everybody else's thoughts, but I'm just going to use this structure of these few sort of topics and questions to try to open up some of the discussion. So moving on, so potential mechanisms. I think when I agreed with John that we would have this this workshop in the conference, there was a list of potential mechanisms that were kicked around. Maybe they're already listed against what this workshop is. So there's lots of things that you could choose to do, and this is not meant to be an exhaustive list at all. But there are lots of potential mechanisms. But that doesn't necessarily give us the answer in terms of how we actually move this subject area forward. So let's not be hidebound by these. I'm going to keep these on the screen as we move through the various topics that we have. But bear in mind, there is this basic level of thinking about types of things that we want to do. So the first topic of discussion that I want to have is around what are the problems. So we have this overarching issue that we're trying to address in this workshop this morning, establishing the conditions for large-scale coordinated national TES activity. So let's spend a little bit of time, if we can, talking and thinking about what are the problems with that? Why isn't that just a straightforward thing, or is there even a problem to solve? Is it so straightforward that there's literally nothing to do? So yes, I'll open up that to anybody who wants to make a statement or a point of clarification, or raise a question themselves around this area of what are the problems that we might want to try to overcome through this challenge. So I don't know, Sam, if we are how we're going to manage this now as we do this as a.
Well, we have to play it by ear a little. So thanks for those of you in the audience, and bear with us with the technology. This Remo platform is new to a lot of us. So I've been notified by colleagues that there is a raise hand function within the interface. So if we use that as a system to be able to flag up that there's someone in the audience who would like to start the discussion or raise a point or add their thoughts to what's been said, And then we can invite them to the stage where Michael and I are on the screen now and you can hear us. And that way we can move through the discussion. But we have to work around a limitation of around 10 people on the stage at the same time. So if you have a look on the interface, you'll find there's a set of buttons across the lower edge of your screen. So down there, have a look on the More button, and you may find there's a raise hand feature. Alternatively, we could use the chat function. You can say, hey, I want to say something, and then I'll bounce you into the speaker's view, and then you can join in. So I realize, John, you're already as a speaker here. So perhaps to start with, we could begin our discussion here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. So, Michael, thanks for starting the session and guiding us. I guess in terms of the challenges, I think we need to really understand that there's a mind shift that needs to change when we move to TES, rather than the ad hoc decision making that's been done in the traditional environment. So with that, I'm kind of referring to having a holistic perspective across the life cycle and across the commercial and engineering activities. So I think the shift in the mindset is critical across different stakeholders. So yeah, just to kickstart, I would suggest that.
Okay, that's an excellent point.
I have a member of the audience who would like to join us here on the stage. So Steve, I'd like to invite you here. So please be prepared for your microphone and camera to be revealed. So I do hope you are ready for that. So I'm going to add you to the stage here. So thank you for joining in. And now you should be able to switch on your microphone and camera. You can use just the microphone if you prefer. Thank you, Steve. Fantastic. You are muted though, so please unmute. Oh, sorry, opposite. There we go.
There you go. You can talk now.
Okay. One of the things that I think we will face increasingly in the future is the fact that there's lots of people wanting to affect a change, but you're still going to need people to actually enact that change. So how do we attract people at all levels into some kind of education, etc., that is going to set them up for a through life engineering mentality? So how do we build this into apprenticeships and undergraduate degrees and things like that?
Yeah, well, I think that's clearly an excellent point and an excellent challenge. And I guess the work that's already started at Cranfield is part of that, but I guess it addresses a particular portion of the demographic. Yeah, have you got any views on how to achieve that yourself?
I think it's actually engagement with those institutions that are going to influence them. We've got things like STEM and things like that is doing a really good job of bringing people into engineering. But are we making them aware of the fact that TES effectively is a viable engineering subject?
Yeah, I think that's a real good point. Does anybody else want to come in with any related comments around that? Or any other comments or questions?
Yes, so please bear with us. So those of you who are in the audience who would like to join in, I see Keith, you're welcome to join us here on the stage. So I'll just add you in now. Thank you for joining in. For those of you who want to join, use the More button, and then there's a raise hand, and then we can bring you onto the stage to join us here. Thank you. It takes a short moment for the connection to be made. Thank you, Keith. We can see and hear you.
Hello from Wales, Neil Point. I think we're creating the TES Council actually here.
Yeah.
Because quite a few of our participants are TES Council members, so that's very good. I'd like to challenge Steve first, just for something to do. So, even though the name TES, Through Life Engineering Services, has the word engineering in it, it's not necessarily an engineering subject. That's the first thing we need to correct. It's much wider than that. It's organizational design. And actually, what we've found is the way to tackle this is to engage the executives of your organization first and foremost, because without them, not a lot else will happen. And there is a lot of education required of those executives, because basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to connect business to engineering and engineering to business, both directions. So you need to make engineers out of business people and business people out of engineers, and that's a difficult topic. That's how you that's how we have certainly started to crack the TES conundrum. And in the early days of the TES Council, we made the mistake of thinking that it was an engineering process, and it isn't. Is an essential part of the topic.
I suppose it's challenging, though, isn't it, Keith?
I have to say over.
I suppose it's very challenging, Keith, isn't it? Because you could convince yourself that what you need is almost super people who can more or less do anything, because you've got to have that appreciation of engineering and in some cases some depth of knowledge of specific engineering areas, I guess, to address some of the challenges. But I mean, you're absolutely right. It's, ultimately this is about a business approach, a way of doing business, especially for larger organizations, a kind of changing philosophy almost. So it maybe is quite difficult, or maybe I'm exaggerating the level of complexity there is there.
I think the trick is to make it non-complex. That's the hard bit. That's really hard. It's very simple to hide in complexity. It's very difficult to actually make complex things simple.
Yeah,
I would agree with Keith. Really I would agree with Keith. It does go beyond engineering, but the reason I would still, at the moment, make that engineering link is the fact that the only way you're going to attract people in at the lower end of the pay scale is to show that there's a development group, and ultimately somebody will want to be chartered one day or achieve that kind of level. And in the absence of another function, so do you become a chartered project manager, or do you become a chartered supportability engineer, which is probably the closest I would put from an engineering background to what we're talking about. You need to be able to show a career path for the individuals. And that's the only reason that I would still pigeonhole it with engineering. But I do agree totally with what you're saying. It goes beyond engineering. It's that whole supportability piece. It's the gap between product-centric and service-centric. That's the big difference.
Yeah, the function that we've mostly aligned to and had to work quite hard with is effectively operations management, actually. Making that and giving teeth to the operational management function, which is that link between the interface of the pure engineering, and don't forget we need that stuff, but it's the link back into the nobody's going to do anything unless the business actually puts resource into it. And that's one of the critical gaps that we find needs addressing at the moment. And that's why the PAS 280 has that big lump of vertical and horizontal planning layer before it goes anywhere near the sort of actual hands-on doing piece. And the original version of PAS 280 didn't have that. And by consensus, that was actually the gap. that was really missing, and I often have this sort of, maybe it's a bit theatrical, but I've been doing engineering for quite a few hundred years now, and everybody sort of roughly knows how it works. Okay, there's massive improvements, etc., on the horizon and big changes, but we roughly know how it works. The business aspects have been very neglected, actually, and it's that link between, and we liken it to engineering business management, not engineering and business management. They're conjoined, and that's the essential piece that is always, tends to be missing. It's a massive topic, and we there's no, it's the sum of the parts that is greater and all that, but it's how do you actually pull them all together with the technologies and the processes and the people, and more importantly, the thing that bites us all the time is the behavioral change aspects. So it's learned behaviors, it's about the strategic direction of organizations that may or may not allow for TES type thinking is absolutely critical. So if we're looking for, Michael's question was, how do we start to do this, to bring it into the, let's say, national psyche? We have to probably segment the whole market. So there's people who need to be aware of the subject, and there's people who need to be practitioners of the subject, and then there's going to be people who probably need to be some form of expert in the whole process, and I suspect that they will become the thought leaders where the practitioners and the awareness bit goes. But yeah, it's an interesting topic.
So is that something that the TES Council have been able to map out? I take his point totally. Engineering is probably the wrong place to pigeonhole things. But if we were to attract people into this, to give them the awareness and ultimately the experts, have we identified the group of people that we should be attracting to the subject? And if we have we then progressed anywhere with the TES Council to actually attract those people into the right courses, or in some cases get those courses adapted to take into account TES thinking?
Well, it's a good question. I think my summary would be, and others can are very welcome to step into this. We've taken a progressive approach, I would say. So the work with the MSc offering that's at Cranfield is about a particular demographic, and I guess that is about people that are at a stage in their career that have got engineering expertise and are working in a service function, I guess, and are, the idea is to try to develop them in this more holistic way, and to give specific skills there. So that was identified, I think, as the first group to try to make an offering against. Some of the broader questions, we haven't got a hit list with people that we have to go out and train or anything like that. I think we will. I think we ought to start to work up a progressive. What are the different layers of skills offering that we can start to provide? But it's also a question of getting people sufficiently interested to make those offerings relevant. I don't know, John, maybe you've got a view on this. Are you still there?
Unmute myself. Yeah, so I think in terms of the MSc at Cranfield, what we're really looking at is giving the foundations for through life engineering services. And we're not necessarily promoting it as a specifically engineering course. This is really, if you like, the closest thing to an MBA in terms of the kind of manufacturing or complex asset related professionals And I mean, we've had people like accountants on the course that have done really well. So from my perspective, I really think that we need to think of it as a multidisciplinary field. We need to really promote different kinds of skills in this, and really consider how these different people with maybe different skills work together, because TES is about bringing together all these different skills. And I think that's the unique thing. Rather than just saying, oh, we need a bunch of engineers or we need a bunch of supply chain experts, that's not what TES is about. It's about getting a good appreciation of all these different skills. And I think the other thing is about giving them the platform to communicate with each other, because there are challenges in terms of the language, the understanding. And I think we need to really have that, maybe in a way, an exchange currency across all these different traditional disciplines. We kind of need to think about how TES is maybe in the middle, and it's actually facilitating the communication across all these disciplines. So yeah, I think that would be my sort of take on it.
Excellent. Yeah,
I'd support you in that, John. So the groups that we've sent through the MSc, and we're into our, how many is it now? Two groups. I can't remember. You know, we have psychologists, we've got accountants, as John said, we've got retail managers. They're all doing the same
background.
Support science background. You know, previous managers of the women's national rugby team. You know, but what they all go through the same program. It's not tailored. It's the idea is to almost create some form, not quite a polymath, but at least aware of all these various topics, because you need to bring them all together to be able to make rational decisions about your business decisions, about the organization that is informed by all of these various topics that we've just mentioned. And you know, so you can either go at it by creating some incredible superhuman with multiple brain sets, or we can try and take really complex topics and trying to distill them down into packages that can exist within an individual, that can understand them and can understand the essence of those elements, and then make decisions based on each of those contributions from each of the areas. You know, our own team, you know, we feature very heavily on the consultancy side, not because, you know, we get paid lots of money. We're civil servants, so we don't get paid hardly anything. Of course, poverty is our name. Which was interesting for Daniel's presentation. That was the first thing he was trying to address. So at least someone's standing up for us. But we're looking more at the behavioural influence elements of influencing executive leadership within organisations with no authority whatsoever. We have no power as such. We have to be very, very convincing. And you know, one of the approaches that we use, my favourite phrase that I use a lot, is it's all about academic rigor applied in practice. It's being able to make those convincing arguments within a business organisation to compel the business to do something. And that's what TES is really all about, is making business make really good business decisions, invest in the activity, whatever it is, whether it's a new technology, a new layer of research, a new activity, a new product set. You know, it doesn't matter what those business decisions are, because it will vary, because the strategic direction of the organization will vary, and can vary within an individual organization over time. And that's the other critical piece of TES, is that time is a major function of TES, because it's the longevity. This isn't about making snap decisions. It's about trying to plan into the future. And John's opening speech this morning was, you know, the time scales involved are long-term time scales. This is not about day-to-day, really about day-to-day tactical management. The real critical element that TES brings to the party is this longer term view. and the business elements, etc. Would be my understanding and practical application of the subject. Would you agree, John? Is that about right?
I think the kind of long life cycle is one of the things that's really challenging. I think it's also the fact that if we're thinking of a 30, 40, 50-year life cycle, we also need to think of like software obsolescence, or how we're going to keep the data accessible, the different models, the different platforms, how they can communicate with each other, how we can, as well as people. And that's also a key element here in terms of people retire sometimes, and people change roles, and how we can kind of keep their knowledge in the business. That's a huge challenge.
Yeah, some excellent points there, I guess, about. I mean, I think it does set into context the nature of the long-term challenge that we describe here. When you think, some of these projects outlive the majority of people who start to work on them at the onset of a project in terms of their life and their career, and it's a particular mindset, I guess, that is needed specifically for that, because some people struggle with that. I'm going to move us on to the next bit of this, because I think we've talked about a number of key problems there around changing mindsets, attracting people, the development routes, the holistic nature of the skill set that we need to have, and then this critical point, I think, about the long life cycles that we're dealing with. I'm going to move us on to another subject area, which is the role of research in this whole subject area, the role of research, any gaps in the science or the research base that we see around us now that prevents us from moving down this route. And keep in mind as we're talking about this, that there is engineering research that's needed in this area, but there's potentially research in terms of organizational design, how organizations work, management practices, etc., other things. So who's got a view or anything interesting that they feel they want to say about what the role of research is in this question of establishing the conditions for large-scale coordinated activity on TES?
While we think about that, we had one additional question from the audience from Julio Rebola, and that is posted in the chat function. Michael, can you see that on the same list of messages?
Bear with me. Yes, I can.
Look on the right-hand side, click chat.
Yeah, I can.
It's raising the distinction of TES and how it's recognized in engineering.
I'm wondering if, Julio, if you're here, would you like to comment on that?
We can invite you to the stage here with the rest of the panel. I'll bring you on. Apologies if you're not quite ready. We can do a quick switch around. Yeah, you should have a notification message.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, thanks. So Julio Rebola from Siemens. I think it's partly what you've been discussing. So I think when we try to promote a little bit the topic of TES within the Siemens organization, often the topic, like as you mentioned, fell down like in between the engineering camp and the business camp, and neither of those really recognized or saw themselves within TES. So the engineering guys would be, in essence, saying, "Oh, it sounds like a bit more commercial, but my preference would be to do like a type on MBA." And then the non-engineering functions would be, that is far too technical, so I would rather do something different. So I guess it's just kind of like the nature of the beast. The fact that it's in both camps, maybe just a bit of more promotion, or I don't know, just communicating the content a bit more, maybe.
I think, I mean, there is undoubtedly a challenge of making people recognise the existence of TES as a subject area and the fact it's a potential career for them. But I guess from a business transformation point of view, I guess, you know, as Keith says, it's recognising at that senior level that there's an opportunity there. So what you've asked I think has got a number of different dimensions associated with it. I don't know whether either John or Keith wants to comment further on that.
I mean, I think it's one of the major challenges in that TES is maybe struggling to define a home in terms of where it sits in organizations, because it's cross-cutting, and the way organizations typically are structured, it's not necessarily cross-cutting. I think that the kind of silos in organizations prevents a clear adoption path for TES. I think that's my impression. I'm not sure whether others in companies would like to comment on that.
So has anybody got an organisational view from within a company as to what John said? Certainly, organisational structures are always going to exist at some level, and in a way, we can think of them as quite artificial. But the fact is, you know, people have line management and they have parts of organisations that they're aligned to, and that does drive behaviours. And when we talk about something holistic like TES, I guess that is always going to be a challenge. So I don't know. Is there anybody who wants to make a statement, express a view from a company perspective?
I think this is where, not from a company perspective, I wouldn't do that, but from my personal perspective, I agree with both John and Keith. It shouldn't be an engineering discipline, but it needs to grow somewhere. And at some point in the future, it would then naturally break away when those individuals who are the overarching experts are recognized as an entity in their own right. And then they should be advising those other functions about what their aspects need to contribute. So in a way, it's a little bit like obsolescence management. Obsolescence management doesn't actually belong to engineering or the supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. It's actually a cross-functional discipline, but it needs to be picked up and run with. Somebody needs to pick it up and run with it. And I sort of agree with Keith. I don't know if engineering is the right place to run with it. But would I put it towards project management, or would I put it towards similar function at the moment? I don't think I would. But I know in the accountant that John was talking about, and he had got one of those mindsets which crossed the boundaries. And that's why he did so well on the course. He was an accountant by his original trade, but that quickly slipped into the background, and he almost became a TES engineer or a TES individual.
None of us.
But it's where do we grow it?
None of us should be surprised that an accountant can do well at this type of thing. I don't think. Yeah, I mean, these are quite meaty topics, and you know what we're not trying to do necessarily in this workshop is fix everything. But I think the idea of this is to try and get the key areas onto the table, get us all thinking about where they. You know, ultimately these are kind of implementation challenges that go alongside the different research areas that we might that get discussed in a conference like this. So thank you for that, and thank you for posting the question, Julio. That was useful. But let's move on a little bit. So let's think about this question of the role of research. gaps in research. And as we've discussed, this is a general subject area. This isn't just about engineering and technology-based research, but where do you think we are? Do we think there are particular gaps that prevent uptake of the TES model in the research base, or do we think the research is there waiting to be exploited if some of these other organisational and people challenges got resolved? Has anybody got a view on that?
So again, if you'd like to join us here on the stage to put your point across, please use the Remo interface to hit more, and then you can raise your hand and then we can add you to the stage. Alternatively, post a question in the chat function, we can pick it up there.
So Keith, you've returned, I've noticed.
I have returned. I'm afraid satellite signals and Welsh rain don't get on very well.
Oh, well.
So is there an engineer in the house that can help me with this? I wouldn't mind. I'm a bloody telecoms engineer and I can't sort it out. So, just before I disappeared due to enforced environmental issues, there was a discussion or a question about MBA versus engineering. So I can use myself as a stunt double for this one. So I had to go and endure an MBA for a very long time with the Open University, a real degree through the OU. Sorry to offend everybody. But I also had to go and do another master's, one for each foot, on engineering business management to start to actually understand how this links, because there is definitely divisions between those types of thinking, but there is a very credible connection between the two. It's relatively simple to actually join up the thinking, and that is a bit of an advert for Cranfield now. That's what we've tried to do in the TES program, to actually try and join up those two things, so that you don't have to go and do and invest quite a lot of money in doing a couple of masters. As I say, one for each foot. We're trying to get this thinking as relatively commonplace, and it could be considered a new subject. I don't think it really is. I think it's been around for a long time. It's just been quite misunderstood, certainly not written down, and certainly not pushed in any way, shape, or form as a real job, if you, for want of a better word. And I think so. I've likened this through the work that we're doing through the TES Council and latterly within Ministry of Defence, and trying to actually build a new market, which is what we're actually trying to do. This is very what do we call it? Pre-early market engagement. This is a new, literally like a new topic, but more importantly, looking for an audience, which I think exists. And from a behavioural point of view, the sort of Cotter approach to behavioural change is always about trying to build this sort of guiding coalition and create this sense of urgency of the first couple of steps. And we're in that very early cycle of trying to get that guiding coalition. In the early days, Michael, we tried to engage quite successfully, actually, the politicians of the world being the UK, of course. And actually that had quite a significant effect. The problem is these dastardly elections get in the way, and the friendly politicians keep getting kicked out of their probably because they're following TES and preaching TES, but all the management get them out, and all the engineers are voting for them. Yay. So it is a difficult one, but the role of the TES Council, and we talked, Steve was talking about this, definitely has that rationale to go to the political level, but the real reason for it is that you want to try and go as high up whatever the system is, whatever the boundary is. You're trying to get the executive of that system involved so that they start asking the right questions. What's the return on investment of this activity, whatever that activity actually is? Well, to do that, you have to know what your inputs are and what the outputs are. So from a TES point of view, we've spent a lot of time trying to work this out. From a TES point of view, when you're looking at large scale capital assets, that would typically be some form of availability of a piece of kit that somebody actually wants. So this is why John was going on about the demand element before, because if nobody actually wants it, there's no value in actually generating the availability of the large scale capital asset. And to generate that availability costs money, because you spend money on doing support activities, whether they are unscheduled or scheduled activity, preventative versus cure. And there is no real sort of single solution for this stuff. Trust me, we've searched high and low to try and get a standardized sort of solution for everything, and it's really evasive at the moment. We can't see it. I'm not saying it won't happen, but at the moment we can't see it. But the TES element is about managing that input cash to pay for support activity to generate availability of equipment that somebody wants. That's the whole point. Now, quite a simple statement, but actually trying to understand each of those elements is really quite difficult, and trying to understand them in the same sort of, maybe not sentence, but possibly a paragraph, and to try and sort of write the business case both in an Excel spreadsheet and a Word document, so that a mere mortal could actually understand. Yes, that's the obvious decision that this organisation needs to buy into, or not yet, because that could be, again, the time scale helps with this, and trying to enumerate that argument is really what TES is all about. And it's a difficult topic because it covers such a broad church, but it's trying to get the single spreadsheet and the single Word document together as one convincing argument to show people that this is the right decision to be made, and therefore the investment should be made in whatever it is your business is. And that's why it's so interesting, of course, because it is so wide.
Well, so you make a number of interesting points there, Keith. So thank you for that. And I think it does link back to this, in some ways, to this new question that I'm now on, which is role of research gaps in the research, because you almost start to think, well, being flippant about it and developing one of the things you said, how do we make TES a vote winner? It probably isn't a vote winner. I don't think Donald Trump has mentioned TES once in his campaign. Did he really? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's better than yours.
Well, that's right. TES under Trump is great. It's the best TES that you've ever seen.
And make them pay.
Well, that's right. Yes, but it's kind of flippant, but we need to make it important. And interestingly as well, we all know the fact we're doing this conference virtually is evidence of the fact that we are living through history at the moment. There's a lot of stuff. Your question about availability of kit that is wanted and when it's wanted. That the demand signal for a lot of things is an awful lot different than it probably was a year ago.
Exactly.
And dealing with that is complex, but at the heart of this, there's a whole thing of management of uncertainty. So, interesting comments there. I wonder if anybody else has got views on the role of research. Specific
Michael, my 2 pence for this session quite an interesting concept. I probably was more familiar with the concept of whole life as opposed to through life before I joined Cranfield. I knew the concept existed because I have noticed in one of the partners or industry sectors who use through life as a terminology. So it was quite interesting. So when I first got introduced, I thought like, okay, it's something to do. And don't get me wrong, I saw that as a costing tool. Bluntly, a costing tool to know where my availability is, what my cash flow is, what I can invest in. But over the last 7 years, I can definitely comment that it's a lot more complicated and it's a lot broader. Rather than the industry sectors thinking, hey, how do I approach it? I would suggest the other way around. Think about, if I am a manager, what is the asset? What is my remit? If you know that landscape, then you can push all of the pillars of how, and this is what we call organizational readiness. I'm sure John would also compliment on that aspect. So it's called organizational readiness. It doesn't have to be at an organization level. It could be at a small departmental level or maybe a small team level. The other issue I also see is the interface between the teams. So, for example, how well do we communicate within our organization? We don't usually mention this. We don't usually say, I know I've got a meeting. Yes, I'm going to do it. Like, for example, Keith said, I've got problems being a telecom engineer, being in Wales. I've got this issue. If you ask me, the solution might be, is it hardwired? Are those more reliable than my fully wireless systems? Is that the best answer? I don't know. Everybody I know of who've had anything to do internet with these wireless services, whenever there's poor weather, they have disruption. At some levels, I'm not saying perfect, but that doesn't mean that the systems are not there. And currently, the more emphasis is completely on the digital platform. Few years back, if you asked me what was data, I would say an SN curve, for example, a stress strain curve, or some form of a plot. That was what data was. Today, I call even this conversation data. How do we record it? How do we use it? How do we deploy it? It's that idea and how to deploy it effectively. So for me, to sum up, there is that understanding which we need to develop. TESS is not something like a new term. It exists in your existing work. And that practicality could be from the designer's perspective, the manager's perspective, or the maintenance perspective, the manufacturer's perspective. You could pick as many strings out. And what I see it as, the research happening at the grassroots level or the ground level is the pool, and they need to have that feedback across the team, perhaps across the organization. Some form of a platform that everybody can tap into so that they know that this resource exists. For example, if we did deliver a tool, for example, for preventative for availability, looking at maintenance or availability of my asset, only the top level will understand where the data comes from, what the runtime is, when I have I scheduled it, what's the cost, what's the parts, have I got availability, and so on and so forth. But in reality, the subgroups don't know the answers. They only populate probably a small part of it, and then they move away. And perhaps that understanding across, saying, hey, first thing is I do have a resource that needs to be understood by everybody. Doesn't have to be academic. It has to come from the industry perspective as well. What do I have? Am I just going to do my job the same way I'm going to do? For instance, this conference, when we first had the discussion of online, the option was, do we record? That's data. And then play it. Or do we want to look at real time? And I would use the same analogy in your maintenance as well. The systems will grow. They're complex. They will evolve. But there will be a time where we will have that capability of real time monitoring of that asset. And that becomes the research angle, how to achieve there. And on the role is, how do I facilitate it? So I see both sides. So it's not just a role, it's both research as well. And yes, there is going to be gaps. And I think that gap is not just for research, it is also for the role, for the individual, for the person who's actually trying to deliver it. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. For me, you call it an asset management, you call it a whole life, through life, you ask about availability. We are talking about the same concept. How do I manage my asset? That's the simple question. And the answers are multiple, okay? And I'll leave it to the risk experts to add bit. But that's my kind of 2 pence to this session to say how I see TES. And for me, it's no different. I've started putting it into my real-time life in my home. If I buy a system, how long is it going to be? Your mobile phone, for example, your cars, for example. We are going into different service models. I don't know in future, will we actually even buy our own homes? We will use it as a service, as a possibility. It's just that it's not facilitated yet, but I see a future, everything is possible. What do you want? And it's up to the organization, the individual, what they want out of it.
Okay, so can I just ask a question just in response to that? Because again, quite a lot of interesting points there.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked about the idea of a platform. Now I don't know what you meant by that. Right. I mean, what I observe though is a lot of business model concepts have reached a critical mass of interest and success when somebody's raised a platform in the sense of something like Uber or Airbnb or something like that as an actual consumer platform. I'm not sure how something like that would manifest itself in TES because of its high value asset thing. But is that what you're talking about? Or
let me be very clear. When I say a platform, I'm not expecting you to create something new, because the research and everybody else will think, hey, I'm going to go back and I'm going to start again recreating the wheel. No, I'm not saying that. All you need is a simple SharePoint, for example. If whoever is documenting information, if the terminology is known by everybody in the organization so that they can search, do I have that resource first, or what we call a knowledge or understanding of what I have in capability, before I blindly say, hey, for the last 5 years, this is what I've done for my maintenance, so I'm just going to follow it through. Because that way you're not disrupting that activity. You're just going with, oh, okay, when the technology comes, I'll change. But rather, if I said, hey, your plant is probably south of England and my plant probably is in Scotland, let's look at least annually, somebody who joins all of that data together, puts it using the same infrastructure. I'm not even expecting you to create something new. It probably should be a searchable database, at least for that information to start with. So people are, okay, they're having something else. Oh, these guys are doing something else. It's to get that awareness to start with. And then you will see that collaboration happens. Now that we are in virtual, people can literally ring you. Of course, our times have gone extended. Our working time patterns have changed. Efficiency, we thought productivity is going to be low, but that's improved as well. Because at the end of the day, we still haven't given the systems to behave by themselves, if that makes sense. So we are still controlling it. And I'm sure that level of learning will come through over time. A typical example I'm saying is this, like Nest as an example for a company. So they came up originally with a thermostat, which you can control using a phone. They changed the attitude. Now they've had camera systems. They've got a lot of products under one Nest part. And all they've done is that platform is the same. They haven't changed that platform. They just added more products to it. And what I'm saying is, if you can share that knowledge across your organization, that would be great. I'm not saying outside organization. Of course, there are restrictions and things. But within the organization, if you can share that information, that'd be great.
Okay, I mean that's interesting stuff. So that idea of a kind of consolidated knowledge base that is there for people to understand what's been done and who's active, and that there is actually even work going on in this area. I guess that is an interesting concept, I suppose.
It's somewhere we need to convene people. You might understand TES differently to somebody else. For me, it starts at a conceptual stage through to end of life. So I look at the full cycle. if it is a cycle or if it is a full process flow. I see it everywhere. Technologies is one side, resources in terms of human intervention is the other bit, and it's our way of doing things. How and it's up to us. What do we would like to do? What would we like to do?
Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting.
It's interesting that you mentioned Nest, Pavan, because because that has a massively interesting dynamic with it. In that, okay, technologically and engineeringly, if that's a word, it is now. There's this range of products that's been developed over time, and then they get bought out by a giant satanic organization, and they remove 50% of the products from the market. Do they carry on supporting in an engineering work? Well, obviously not. So the business model has completely changed the dynamic of the let's call it the Nest system overnight, literally overnight. From our point of view, from the business point of view, they probably thought about that for quite a long time,
Not necessarily,
and worked out how to do it, but did they turn off? When did they turn off all the engineering elements?
Well, we don't
they
know.
only turn it off.
It
exactly.
Happened overnight.
But this is yes. Well, from our point of view, it did. But from the business point of view, I'd like to think that it didn't. The reality is, it probably was a very snap decision, and this is the problem, that the enemy within TES is firefighting, right? Firefighting in an organization, because it's very exciting, and in fact, in military defense, we encourage it. We give people medals for doing it. The fact that the people who are firefighting are probably the ones that have lit the fires in the first place is immaterial, but what we're trying to stop in TES is actually that firefighting. We're trying to say, we want to turn everybody into really boring planners, so that there's no issues in the future because we've predicted it. And this is why it's so important on the modeling aspects. And I don't know if this is I think it might be the second mention of a digital twin today. That type of thinking is really important to try and predict what's actually going to happen in the future, so that all of the money that's spent to support those decisions isn't spent in a nugatory way.
I just have one comment there, though.
Okay.
You said about people having to plan something very mundane, elements of where we don't want them to look through because we've said it. I think we should repurpose that knowledge elsewhere. If we have a level of confidence that the system performs, the decisions it makes is correct. Of course, there's going to be not a full 100% hit all the time, because it's not a yes or no question. We need to be careful. We say, hey, how would you add value to this? Because I see this as practitioners or end users' knowledge perspective. I'll talk about maintenance. For example, you said if that system they already thought through. It was the engineer who said, if I do upgrade my system or move away, how much support is going to be left for that asset? Now, in your world, your asset life is too big. You can't just jump like that. You've already got an asset, and I can guarantee you, and you will confirm as well, we've been in a pipeline developing this for 20 years, 25 years, and especially in the last decade, we've seen a very significant growth in the amount of computer-based support. Let's call it a simplistic, the digital platform has come up. What people thought was data is not anymore. So I think then the question then becomes, the management sees and that's why the management is there. They see the future, how they want to grow this. We are not talking about future as in tomorrow, next week. We are talking about 3 years, 5 years. And I'm sure all of there is a corporate plan where people have to vision that where they want to go. And for that, we need that data. And a simplistic example for your decision is our recent government announcement. This is the first time I've actually seen some plots which were probably explained over the last couple of days. Misexplained, and I call it that. People don't see what the data is, and people interpret it differently. Previously, if you have seen 6 months back, none of them were shown. No data was shown like that level of specificity. So what I'm saying is, it's about that knowledge. It's about how do we use it, what somebody thinks, and if we can capture that, that becomes the research of how to get that data is the research element. The role is, how else do I spread this word? How do I share that information? How do I exchange that information to help you make that critical decision that, hey, I am not by myself. Of course, there are 100,000 people behind me who's got 100,000 people behind me having similar problems across the world. Perhaps they come into a forum, and that's how I see the Test Council facilitate all of this discussion. So, okay. Sorry, Michael, we went ahead with a lot of discussion. I'd probably go off now.
No, don't be sorry. If you've talked too much, it's because I've done a bad job of controlling you. So don't worry about that. So I mean, just before we move off this topic of role of research, because we seem to have. I mean, I suppose I didn't know what we were going to end up talking about when I just put these headings together. But I guess, you know, we're talking in much more general terms at a research topic level than maybe I'd anticipated, which is good. Because, you know, all the points around the challenges here have been around the holistic nature of what we're talking about here with TES. But yeah, I'm interested in this. I'm just wondering, has anybody else got any comments specifically about research gaps? Or approaches to research, or the role of research in elevating TES in the way that we want to do it, before we move on to another subtopic. If
try
not,
not to hog Michael, but so John Urkyunku and myself had a conversation quite a few years ago about this very issue, about research. And what I could at that point bring to the table from a TES point, practical TES applied point of view, was, well, actually, John, I've got a load of problems which we cannot find solutions for. They're just not there. So if there's no good idea in terms of, you know, a practical solution, we would be sensible to invest in some form of research to actually solve the issue. Now, of course, our issues would therefore be time bound because they're connected to the forward demand requirements of defence, for example. But what an outcome of the TES process is, and this is back to Pavin's point, it starts to throw up almost like goal-seeking targets of, you know, hey, we need somebody to go and have a look at this topic. And it needs to be, you know, a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever the time scale is, and it needs to cost less than, and we can give a pound note value for that. And that will start to back to this sort of centralized library point of view. You know, that will start to list areas of research that a particular client, in this case defense, for example, would actually have on the table that a researcher could go and have a look at and sort of say, well, I'm interested in that. Or, you know, actually, I've got some research that's been going on for a while that nobody knows anything about, and it will match that requirement. So there is a definite relationship between the practically applied TES part and the future requirement in terms of the research piece. So I think they are very complementary. You know, that's why we're here today, you know, to try and assist that connection, really.
No, so that's good. I mean, so that idea of a knowledge base, as I'm calling it, could be just as much about the problems where there are no solutions, as you've described it, as it would be about work that's already gone on, or technical solutions that are already out there, or whatever, which I think is a very interesting point, and could give some interesting research focus, I guess, as an approach. Okay, that's very insightful and very useful. I'm gonna move us on a little bit. And I'm going to come back to your point again, Keith, which is the how we make TES a vote winner. I didn't know we were going to say that as I went into this. So I got this more neutral statement about how we get stakeholders interested. But we've kind of kicked this around a little bit, and we've got more people in the audience than have spoken yet. Nobody has to speak if they don't want to, but you might want to get yourselves lined up with your opinions if you wish to. It's nice to get a variety of different people talking in these sessions. How do we get people interested? TES through life, it's got these many implications in terms of critical pieces of infrastructure being available at the time that they're wanted. It has this big, quite far-reaching impact in terms of how businesses are operated, and I think a very strong connection with sustainability if it's done correctly. But how do we raise the game, and how do we get stakeholders, important people who could drive a more joined up approach on this? What types of things would get people more interested in this and to grow it and give it the platform it deserves? Who's got a view on that? Steve, you've appeared on the stage, I notice.
It joins in with the research in a way, but are we guilty of being typical designers? We're telling the customer what the customer needs. Have we actually done any research into how much the customer, the politicians or the executives of the businesses, etc., or the big organizations like the MOD, have we actually gone to them and actually asked them what their problems are? So it touches on what Keith was saying about that knowledge base, but instead of the knowledge base, can we understand what their needs are? And then we can then inform them as to how we could then meet their needs, as opposed to us telling them what their problems are. Take more of a pull approach than a push approach.
Yeah, I think you've got a point there. I think we do have information from certain sources in certain areas, but at a holistic level, do we have that? It's a good question. I don't know. Has anybody else got a view on that? I guess I would say we've got a reasonable view of the needs from the people who express a need for TES. What we don't probably have is a view of the needs from people who don't know that they need it, if that makes sense, which is partly where this stakeholder thing is important.
No, I would say that's where the link with research comes in. Is
education, Steve, and education. Because the clients, exactly as Michael said, what we find is, so we class our clients as defence executive inside the Ministry of Defence, and exactly as Michael says, they don't know that they need this. What we talk about is we put a lot of effort into understanding their dissatisfactions. What keeps them awake at night, etc. And then what we've been doing is trying to match the products that are available. Oh, here's my lunch arriving a bit early. Excellent. And the dissatisfactions of those clients, we then try and match them to the vision of effectively TES, because obviously we have a product that we're pushing, but the product has been designed to match the dissatisfactions of the clients. So it's a bit circular in that, chicken and egg and all that sort of stuff. Oh, here's the cat eyeing up my lunch now. It's a whole multimedia experience, isn't it, today? Dear me. So it is very circular, but the trick, I think, is just start the process. It doesn't matter which comes first, just start doing it. One of the points we've learned from TES, we haven't mentioned it before, is that it's a continuous improvement process. So it has to be a cycle all the time. You have to keep doing it and learn from your mistakes and then rebuild. So we use the Deming cycle, plan, do, check, act all the time. It's built into the process. The actual business process is one of the critical learning points. Would be my view.
Yeah. Okay. I think that is valid, and getting started is the thing. And maybe the thing to get started. Maybe maybe this knowledge-based thing, this thing of understanding what problems there are and understanding what solutions there are, gathering some data around that. Maybe that would be the evidence base that we need to make this really compelling. If we could genuinely do that across sectors.
I think rather than look at it from a problem point of view, look at it from an aspirational point of view. So instead of actually gauging those customers and find out what problems they've got, we actually find out what their ideal support solution will be, or their ideal, not support solution, their ideal position of the future would be. The problem with working from people's problems, it's based on what they know is currently possible and it meeting those aspirations. We need to effectively open their eyes to what is possible that they're not already aware of. So it's the aspirations, not the problems, I would match.
Yeah, and I think that is a very good point, and that does link in some ways to the idea of a platform, because all of these media platforms that have emerged over recent years, they all offer a service that nobody would have really thought of in the first place, and I'm not sure that that's quite how this emerges, but probably something will emerge. That's where transformations really come from, where somebody starts to offer something that is beyond just the solution to the problem and just what people would have thought of. So I think that's a very insightful point again. Any other thoughts on this area?
Yes, we do have one question posted on the Q&A. Colleagues, guests in the audience, Saber Kazansky. So I don't know if you can pick that up from the Q&A panel, Michael. Alternatively, we can invite you onto the stage here, Saber.
Sam, I think it was raised for the main session.
Right. Okay.
I think I'm trying to clear it out. Let me clear it out so that it's clear.
Apologies. Yes, I see now. I jumped the gun on that one. I had a different status indicator, a little red dot that had appeared.
It is a good question for this session.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, it is.
Rather interestingly.
But I don't think he's actually in the room, so it's a silent audience participant.
Well, anything else anybody wants to raise on this particular point of getting stakeholders more interested? Maybe we could summarize Saber's question, Keith. If you've, I can't see it actually.
Can I just make one comment, Michael?
Yes, of course.
Whoever wants to take the test need to make sure that language is adaptable across their structure, both a managerial or a management language, and also an engineer's language. Because the question I would ask is, if I'm an engineer, what do I need out of this? Why is it important? Is it the tools, techniques? What is it? I'm interested. From the management perspective, what does it cost me? How can I support it on the long run? Rather than thinking, hey, is this technology going to cost me £100,000? Oh, no, I can't think about it. But if it is only £1,000, what benefit will it add? Because I can tell you straight away, there are organizations who will say, £1,000, no problem. So the other aspect would be, is that resource is going to be expensive as well. If you can translate that into that respective language, engineering, management, you got a winner.
It's not the cost though, Pavin, it's the return. It's the value statement.
Yes, but
it's always that. It's always this bloody value thing that nobody can actually tell you what it means. We've got to have value for money. What does that mean?
Keith, as I said, Keith, when I say cost, I use that as a whole financial term. It's way your management will understand. What's the rate of what's the return on investment?
Yeah, exactly.
What is that key thing that you can sell it? Is it improvement in the style of your working? Is it your ability to be more resourceful, be able to create? Because everybody now, at least in the last 5 years, everybody talks about digital platforms. People take digital as their own cup of tea, how they want to see it. For me, everything is digital. It doesn't matter. And we've been digital for the last decade, for me, at least in my perspective. It's just that we didn't join it together. But now people think, oh, it's a new term. How do we do this? So it's the next session, next level of thinking. So if I want to ask this from a management perspective, hey, 20 years down the lane, can I do a cost model which can evaluate what's my return on investment if I do this kind of approaches? Okay,
Exactly.
that's the management question. On the engineer's question, it would be, hey, what decisions would it help me improve my maintenance decision? And how do I implement it? How do I get there? Is there somebody else in the topic who can actually help us with? And that could be the grassroots level question. So
yes, and
it's
that connection between the whole lot. The question in the Q&A bit, Michael, was about, have we assessed and classified the challenges per each sector, nuclear, aerospace, etc.? If yes, which are the most challenging ones, and is there a specific sector that can be taken as model? I think the reason why I said that's a really interesting question is we did do that assessment in the early days of the TES Council stuff. And the point is, the model, the TES model, is actually applicable in any sector at the level of something like PAS 280 with that diagram that John E threw up before. Most organizations, whether they're air, land, sea, even service based, where it's not even about an actual physical asset, but it is genuinely a service, would recognize the concepts and the processes of TES as described in PAS 280. And that's becoming really evident as we do speak to wider sectors. So the TES Council, for example, we've tried to get banking sectors in, rail, air, nuclear, civil, military, the whole sector. And I don't think there's anybody that has said, I don't recognize the issues that you're talking about here. I think almost without fail, they've said, yeah, these are the gaps and the issues part of the world or in my world. So the applicability is significant, which is why we're so keen to obviously get the vote winner into the executive to make decisions that actually this is really quite useful stuff. And it's a standardized approach to look at very disparate things, so you can keep bringing them back to a standardized sort of review, if you like, because another part of a TES piece is as Pavin's just been talking about there, is the ability to make those trade-off decisions about where do we invest in. But you can, one of the key features we've found is you can start to stack this information into higher and higher levels. So you start off at a very equipment type sort of focused level. You very quickly get into capability management, and you very quickly get into sort of whole environment type sort of management. But it's the same information right the way through the system. But you need to get the building blocks right. But again, it will massively enhance the ability to stack this information to make decisions based at that level. But again, then the problem, of course, is, so you make the decision, how do you then come back down and make everybody in that stack do what the direction that you've actually decided is the right direction? How do they incorporate that within the tactical, the integrated tactical planning rather than the integrated business planning space? It's that connection, and there's not a lot of stuff out there at the moment, which is why we're interested in this sort of stuff. Okay.
No, that's good. That's good. I mean, I think one question that I just have myself in terms of the way that the discussion's unfolded so far. Is there, and I'm being slightly provocative here, is there a bit of a motherhood and apple pie aspect about this? Because you in some ways you could say, well, yes, if you think about through life from the onset of designing something and putting it into service, and then you put all the best practices in and you build your organization around that's inherently going to be a good thing. And you could argue it's like a lot of things. Inherently, it's a good thing. Just as a conceptual level, it's difficult to argue with, almost impossible to argue with, I would say, if described right. But it's, it's the specifics, I guess, that kill you. I mean, do you think, or does anybody think that a danger in engaging with stakeholders is that it does just have this thing of, well, it's, although it's very complex and very deep in terms of the practicalities of it, the conceptual thing is motherhood and apple pie, by which I mean it's all a bit too, it's something that you just can't disagree with, and thereby it's a bit too simplistic. Do you understand what I'm saying? Does anybody share that view, or is that a valid concern, or anybody want to make any statement on that? If not, we'll just discard that as the ramblings of a idiot or madman.
Back to the value. There has to be value in it, and people have value at different levels, but it's about articulating what that value actually is, and it can vary across organizations and people. Literally individual value can vary so much.
Michael, if I may add, I would call it value proposition if you're going to the stakeholders.
Exactly.
It's very clear, very succinct, probably a page long, no more. What is that value? And also, what is that hidden value added if I want to deploy this? Because value could mean not just on return on investment or the finance or the books. It's more than that. How does it engage? Will that reduce my burden of planning for an effective maintenance or an effective delivery, engineering solutions? What is it?
Yeah.
Okay, so that if we can translate that into a value proposition with sharp numbers, and of course there needs to be supported by evidence, then I think it works.
Yeah.
We've worked long and hard to try and connect it to strategy, because the strategy of an organization can change. So, at the moment, our organization values, or the strategy is availability at lowest cost. That's the strategy that the organization is following. When conditions change, and they often do, it's forget the cost. I need agility, i.e. the ability to change my mind and the supply chain or support chain to be relatively reactive. But I need agility with increased availability. So the point is that you're trying to put the system in place that can cope with changes in strategy without redoing the entire process in terms of the support organization. And the metric sets even, and these are all areas, we were asking before about areas for research. These are areas of research that the TES process as applied starts to throw up, that there's not a lot of information or work actually being done in the academic arena to actually, and it's going right the way back to where we started almost, about stuff has sort of fallen through the cracks of the quite succinctly put before, the MBA versus the engineering bit, and then there'd be beasts between those. Is somewhere in here there's a load of dragons and stuff that stuff happens, and it's not very well connected, and hence my comment about building markets. This is definitely a new, I think, research area. Certainly the work that we've done with Cranfield, anytime you do any of the academic literature reviews, it's always a bit scant. There's not a lot out there. Which is great if you want to write a paper, because it's always challenge me on this one.
The problem is a lot of this knowledge is with industries, especially you yourselves, for example. You know all of this. You attend. You do it in practice. When it comes to academic publication, it doesn't exist, and you're right. It's not because we don't want to write. It's just because we haven't translated that thought process enough.
Exactly. And nobody's been asking for it, so it's chicken and egg again. So where's the demand? Well, if there is demand, the supplier of the research, universities, academic institutes, if we can match demand, we need to do TES to ourselves in terms of this. We create the demand, which creates the supply to meet the demand, and it's a funded activity. So we've sort of answered our own question, really.
And I would
do TES to ourselves.
I will also suggest, please ask the questions to your academic partners. It might be something which you do regularly. Maybe have a discussion. We certainly understand. If you ask me a question, if I can't deliver, I will find across our resources, which is the university platform, to find out who's competent enough to help you out. We try to do that. And that's how we push the TES agenda across. So for us, it's not about a specific, I have to be an expert in TES. No. For me, it's about the entire life. Are you coming in the design perspective? Are you coming in the manufacturing perspective? Are you coming in the sustainability perspective? We should have resources. And you should go back and tap into those people who could actually help you. And I think the first fundamental is ask the question to the academics. Simplistic. And the other thing also is perhaps it'll be quite interesting to say, hey, okay, what have you thought about it, guys? Have you started thinking about these kind of attitudinal changes in how to deploy it or how to talk to our management? How do we do that? And that slightly touches on the role side of things. It's to make sure that the stakeholders are still interested.
Another interesting. So we're in our in April. We're in our 20th year as a change organisation within the Ministry of Defence, which is unheard of, really. And people say, "Oh, what is it? Well, why are you still around?" And I have one phrase which is getting to your how to get stakeholders interested. It's always about the money. No matter what anybody tells you, it's about the money, right? Follow the money. If you can articulate a business case which will benefit somebody in terms of money, so there has to be a winner and a loser in any money relationship. If you can save money for one party and and gain it for another, you're probably on a winner, but you probably have to pick your side then, or unless you can share the money equally between those two, as an improvement. So it's always a financial decision at the end of the day. And try not to let anybody kid you otherwise. We need to be able. In fact, the TES Council, first thing we did, right, let's go and research how much money is involved. Is this a big market? And the answer was, it's massive. The money is massive. Right. You take that to anybody and you say the size of the prize is massive. It's bigger than anything that you're even looking at. I'm interested. You get them straight away. Let's not kid ourselves that's the maneuver that we probably need to make, and have a very good financial argument. That's where the TES Council started to kick off, because it was all about generating and sustaining pound notes for the UK economy. At the time, it was about Brexit. So how do we get ourselves out the Brexit hole? Because there's going to be no money coming in. Well, we need to establish the UK as a world leader in TES, because there's lots of money in it. So we stick a sign outside, knock a sign outside the Channel Tunnel. Welcome to the UK, home of TES. Thanks for all your money. That's literally what this was all about in the early days. And I think we've sort of forgotten that money does make the world go round.
Yeah. Okay. So that's useful. So, well, I mean, the last part of this is about trying to wrap up, really, and I mean, I think the intention of having this workshop was partly to make the people who were at the conference aware that there is a TES Council in the UK and there is a kind of body that's trying to move this topic forward. That's what's one part of it. But the other part of it was to get a genuine coming together of views on how we take this topic forward. So you know, the things that I will do with the notes that I've made from this discussion will be about trying to effectively place this set of views into the hands of the TES Council. So kind of summing all of this up is important to me, and I think it's useful to have an outcome from a discussion like this. So I mean, I'm going to go through and pick out the points which I think have been the most important points that have come out of this discussion so far. But then I'll open this up again for anybody else to jump in with anything that I've very clearly missed. So I think, you know, for me, this topic of the knowledge base and the kind of evidence base that there is around the importance of the topic, so it's slightly extending that, is the heart of this, isn't it? Because if we had the right evidence base, then that does demonstrate where the money is, as Keith has said. It demonstrates the importance of the topic, but as well, if we had the right knowledge base that linked solutions that might be available for particular situations and linked business need, then you know, that might give us a real focal point to how we move forward as a TES Council, I guess. So I think that central theme links both the kind of stakeholder interest point and the research-based point in my mind quite well. And you know, the question of how we structure that by sector or through whatever means, I think we you know, we probably do need to make sure that we've got that quite as clearly as we can. So to me, that's where the biggest recommendation would be around all of this. I think it's interesting to reflect on, you know, a lot of the early part of the discussion was around people, really, around the role of people, the skills, the ability to get senior stakeholders involved and interested so that executives place this at the heart of their business strategy, and that we get this transformation in mindset that I think John identified at the start of it is very important. And I think specific challenges and specific, I don't know, some specific communication mechanisms needed around the fact that in a lot of cases with this, we are dealing with very long life cycles, and there's particular communication and mindset challenge about things that have potentially got a longer life cycle than you might have as an individual in a particular job role. I think that's challenging. But again, it links to this idea of can we get our heads around the knowledge base and the evidence base, and it also links in my mind to this this mindset challenge. So to me, if I was going to pull this together into some kind of summary, I would be pulling it together around those kind of headings. I don't know if anybody else has got a different view or a view of anything else that I'm missing in terms of how we might take a statement forward for the TES Council and for our own purposes in terms of understanding how to take this forward.
So again, those of you who've joined us from session 2, that's concluded, if you could raise your hands if you want to join us here on the stage for the final part of this discussion. You'll find in the Remo interface in the More button. Thank you, John.
I guess, Michael, just to continue your kind of request, I think those that haven't heard of TES Council, could I just ask your opinion on what you've heard and seen today? Do you feel any of the material or content could be useful for you? And what would it take you to get involved with TES Council?
So I think we can take that as a silent agreement of the willingness to get involved with the TES Council.
Yeah.
When we used to meet, we used to have nice sandwiches.
We need to go around to Keith, so he's got food on.
Yeah.
Keith, one of the
Table
things we were
service.
discussing was about the social and hospitality side of things. When you asked us about the coffee this morning, we don't know. We actually thought about it as a funny gesture. If we do have the logistics, perhaps in future, we should be able to get them delivered to your doorstep.
Yeah, why not?
You never know. But I think it's a future, not now. But
I was going to say, if you can get a coffee delivered to my doorstep in West Kilbride, I will be very impressed by the service offering you've tapped into. But
I know.
There you go. maybe as you say, it's not so far away.
Bring on the drones.
Well, go on. I mean, I tried to summarize. So, I mean, for those people who joined late, you know, this has been a workshop. It's been a discussion activity, really, about how we establish the conditions for a large-scale coordinated national TES activity, an activity that spans beyond the boundaries of individual companies and organisations. So there's quite a lot of information that I've gathered there. I tried to summarise. I mean, I think, you know, there is probably more work around a common knowledge base, common evidence base, but also a linkage into the behaviours and the skill sets and mindsets of people that are actors in this space. You know, all of that stuff's pretty important. So for me, that seems like a reasonable wrapping up of this. John, I don't know whether you were going to jump in with something else as you've appeared on the screen.
I was just touching on your comment.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think we've had a useful discussion. I have to say, I've never. This is the first time I've done a workshop under these kind of circumstances, and having in my earlier life had training on facilitation of sessions. One of the things that you learn in facilitation skills training is about the power of silence and how you basically, if you're face to face with people, you just look people in the eye and keep your mouth shut, and they have to speak. It doesn't seem to happen quite like that in this situation. So I apologise if I've been struggling a little bit to keep this going, and I apologise that maybe. You know, I mean, thanks to those who have spoken up and got their opinions across, but I hope that it hasn't been too dominated by specific individuals. The idea was to try and make this open-ended. But, you know, we're all going to be around the conference as it unfolds over the next couple of days, and we're all available for ongoing communication around this if people have got points that they didn't feel they were able to raise in the session. So, unless anybody else has got anything else that they'd like to raise, I think we can probably wrap up 11 minutes early, give you 11 minutes of your lives back.
One point I'd like to raise, the Remo platform is split into morning and afternoon sessions. So you have each registered for the AM and PM session for day one, the same for day two. So this day 1 AM session will close and then we need to join in the second workshop at 1 o'clock.
Okay, that's great. Well, I think on that we can wrap up, and we all know that we need to get into the afternoon Remo session then from now on. So thank you all very much for your attention and your involvement, for those people who spoke up in the session. Thanks very much.
Okay, so we'll return to the floor now. So you'll be taken back to the standard Remo interface. You'll be around the tables again randomly. So use the same camera microphone function to have a chat with the folks around your table. But yes, so make sure that you use the My Events. So in the Remo menu on the top left-hand corner, you've got a list of My Events. You can use that to navigate through to the afternoon section. So if you do find you're back in the AM session again, there's no one around, that's where you've got to go, back to the PM.
Please, could I also mention that the chairs, if you wanted to move across table, if you wanted to interact with any of our session chairs or speakers, please do so. If you hover your mouse over the seats with their name, they should say exactly who they are. We have nominated speakers, so under the icon there should also be a small mic as a small image, very small, if you can really pick it up. Those of us with a star, our hosts, feel free to get in touch with us in our tables. The way to move tables, just to remind you, double-click on an empty chair. Please be aware the auditorium has 2 floors, so make sure you're comfortably around floor 1 if you can host as many as possible, rather than going into floor 2. Okay, continue the interaction beyond. Use the chat function, and please get in touch with people either on the table, general chat, or privately.
Okay, right. So we'll close this workshop session, the presentation mode. We'll switch back to the Remo platform. So see you around a table shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.